Family. Lovely. Hello. Welcome. I'm just going to move this over here so that I can see the chat. Hello, hello, hello. Hello, friends. Am I audible to all? Guys, today is the day. Do you know that it didn't cross my mind that this book is set in London? Which is like perfect because we are all waiting for Rin to drop tomorrow, right? In London town, shaky ground. Loud and clear. Can everybody hear me? Give me thumbs up, give me apples and milk, even though, we're off of Animal Farm. I want to tell you guys, for those of you who were with us, I mean, 1984 is a different book than Animal Farm, but this book is almost like part two. It's almost like Animal Farm part two. Jenny, she says, I'm on time today. Thank you so much for the super chat. Deeply appreciate it. Guys, if you want to support this content, please, I've left monetization off so that there's no ads interrupting our experience and our correspondence here together. If it's possible for you, and if you can afford it, definitely leave a super chat. It definitely helps. We just pour it right back into the channel and spread insights and epiphanies even further. So thank you, everybody, for being here. And if you super chat, if you ask a question or anything like that, we're going to leave that to the end, and we will get to it. I just wanted to say, before we get into 1984, this is going to be a crazy ride. I'm very, very excited to go through this with you guys. It really seems to me like Animal Farm and 1984 just go together like peas and carrots, right? Where Animal Farm showed you what it was like to be in the Russian Revolution, right? To have that betrayal be sat upon you, where you expected this utopia to arrive as a result of, the revolution, and then having that painstaking, eerie madness beset upon you, the realization that this isn't going according to plan. You're not going to be a recipient of the rewards that this revolution promised. 1984 is like from the inside perspective, like what it's like living on a day-to-day basis in a tyranny. And so it makes it subtly different. Joanne, thank you so much. Joanne just posted the Discord and I have pinned it. So if anybody wants to join the Discord, we're going to be moving from here to Discord right after this. So definitely join the Discord community. That's where all the fun conversations happen, all the inside jokes. Phantom, thank you so much for the super chat. We're going to get to all the super chats after this. I deeply, deeply appreciate it. So I want to begin with a quote. And this quote is actually from this book, 1984. And it almost epitomizes what the entire book is about. And the quote is, freedom is the ability to say 2 + 2 = 4. Grant that, and all else follows. I want you to really digest that quote, right? Feel what that means as far as kind of the cultural narrative goes. All of the fuss on the left and the right, and all of the cognitive limitation that comes with getting into arguments and conversations you're not sure that you're allowed to have in this day and age. I'm going to read that quote again. Freedom is the ability to say 2 + 2 = 4. Grant that, and all else follows. So, let's get into this. And guys, Snowball is still after us, so I expect you guys to let me know in the comments if the internet crashes. We're still not perfect, but we're getting there. And I always say next week, and I'm going to say that again. Next week, the feed will be totally perfect. So, Chapter 1. Are we plugged in? Are we ready? Chapter 1. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. Hang on one sec, guys. Are you guys hearing that chirping, or is it just me? Hang on one sec. I am going to. There we go. So, can you guys still hear me now? Okay, fantastic. Good. I'm going to keep going. I just muted everything so I can still see the chat. I'm going to read that first paragraph again. It was a bright, cold day in April, and the clocks were striking 13. Winston Smith, his chin nuzzled into his breast in an effort to escape the vile wind, slipped quickly through the glass doors of Victory Mansions, though not quickly enough to prevent a swirl of gritty dust from entering along with him. The hallway smelt of boiled cabbage and old rag mats. At one end of it, a colored poster, too large for indoor display, had been tacked to the wall. It depicted simply an enormous face, more than a meter wide, the face of a man of about 45 with a heavy black mustache and ruggedly handsome features. So, one of the things that I'll say, um, Victory Mansions, right? Have you guys ever lived in one of those apartment complexes that have like a really impressive name, but they're really, really bad? Like it's like all of us have had the Victory Mansions experience, right? And I love that Orwell is playing with this early. Victory Mansions sounds like Victory Mansions. That sounds like the most amazing place to live, right? But what's inside? He said, it smells like boiled cabbage and old rag mats, right? I remember I lived in, I think it was Mountain View Terrace, right? And it didn't have a mountain view; it had a view of like Arby's. It's like and so I immediately identify with this dichotomy because I was a somebody said Apple Place, right? Lots of terraces, lots of something view, right? As somebody who came from a battle rap background, a lot of times the promoters don't have enough money not only to pay for you and your plane ticket, but also your hotel. And so they'll just put you in like the crappiest hotel situation ever, And so this it kind of hit home from me kind of immediately. Um, but when he walks in, it's this disheveled place that's not really held together very well. But there's this giant poster. There's the giant poster of a man who's about 45 with a black mustache and ruggedly handsome features. And it says that it was enormous. It was a poster too large for indoor display. So he's trying to let us know that there is a landscape of salient objects being set up for you now. Salient objects means things to pay attention to, right? And one is definitely this poster. So Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at the best of times, it was seldom working. And at present, the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. So the electric current being cut off during daylight hours means that they're trying to preserve for scarcity's sake, right? They're trying to save resources. And this is a problem that we saw in Animal Farm too, where the pigs or those at the top are saying, okay, well, you have to kind of go without. It's a delayed gratification technique. And the reason that this is difficult is because delayed gratification is a good thing, right? There's a lot of rewards that come from delaying gratification. So, how do we know that those who are telling us to delay gratification, how do we know whether they're for us or against us? How do we know whether they're tyrants or whether they are wise counselors? because sometimes it's good to delay gratification. I mean, that's how you get savings. That's how so give me some of your insight in the chat. And it's saying, look, they need to cut off, this stuff during daylight hours. They need to save energy. What's one of the ways that we can tell whether we're being taken advantage of in that request to delay gratification? Because in both this book and Animal Farm, there are people at the top telling the people at the bottom, we need to save energy, we need to save resources, and they never give it back, right? Um, I think one of the things, and this is kind of one of the major insights that came to me when reading chapter one. When someone tells you to delay gratification, when someone tells you that it's all going to get better someday, they need to be going through the struggle with you. Right? It can't just be that they're eating the apples and the milk while you don't have any. And then they'll say, oh, no, 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 you'll have it eventually. Right now, it's just for me. I mean, I need it. Science, comrades, science, right? That's one of the big differences. Martin Luther King wasn't like sitting up in some high, lofty office. He was in the streets walking, having bricks thrown at him with everyone else. So, all of the heroes who we genuinely and truly appreciate, when they tell us to delay gratification, they're in the trenches with us. And that's at least one of the distinctions to hang on to, right? When someone is kind of promising, these things in the future. So Winston made for the stairs. It was no use trying the lift. Even at times of even in the best of times, it was seldom working. And at present the electric current was cut off during daylight hours. It was part of the economy drive in participation for Hate Week. No comment on that yet. The flat was 7 flights up, and Winston, who was 39 and had a varicose ulcer above his right ankle, went slowly, resting several times on the way. On each landing, opposite the lift shaft, the poster with the enormous face gazed from the wall. It was one of those pictures which are so contrived that the eyes follow you about when you move. Big Brother is watching you, the caption beneath it ran. So everyone who's ever read 1984 is familiar with that phrase, right? Big Brother is watching you. And it's kind of spooky and it's kind of mysterious and it's definitely melancholy. One of the things I want to stick out to you with that phrase, "Big Brother is watching you," and that's definitely the hashtag now. I mean, that's definitely the emoji. I mean, the emoji for Animal Farm was was milk and apples. Now it's definitely all kinds of watching eyes. Um, but when Big Brother is watching you. The sad thing about this phrase is like for me, I have a big brother. And my big brother was actually watching out for me when I was in elementary school. I was a nerd. I always been a nerd. But if anybody picked on me, my big brother would slam them against the wall. Like that was my big brother. And so Big Brother is watching you. The sad thing about this is that it's meant to evoke a kind of good emotion, like you're being watched out for. Like whoever's watching you has a responsibility over you, right? You remember what the pigs were saying in Animal Farm when they were being tyrannical over the rest of the animals? Oh, it's our responsibility, comrades, right? So the pigs were like the big brother who's watching you. And it gives you kind of this sense of shame too, like whatever you're doing, to violate the agenda of Big Brother, you're somehow a bad person as a result of that. So there's a lot of psychological tyranny that we're going to get into as well. Phantom says, same, Mr. B. My big bro looked out for me too. I was the youngest scrawny nerd. Yeah. Yeah, me too. Now I'm a fatter nerd. Inside the flat, and I'll check this out. This part is really spooky. Inside the flat, a fruity voice was reading out a list of figures which had something to do with the production of pig iron. The voice came from an oblong metal plaque, like a dulled mirror, which formed part of the surface of the right hand wall. So I looked up on ChatGPT what's meant by a fruity voice. And what George Orwell means is like kind of an old fashioned game show voice. Like, how creepy is that? You walk into your house and there's this plaque on the wall that you can't remove that just says in this radio voice things about production. It's like, welcome home. Today's production went like this. And, make sure to remember Big Brother is always watching you. It's like, imagine having that sound in your house 24/7. You being a societal commodity who this thing is constantly listening to and surveilling from this mirror like box that's attached to the inside of your house. Very creepy. But the voice came from an oblong metal plaque, like a dulled mirror, which formed part of the surface of the right hand wall. Winston turned a switch, and the voice sank somewhat, though the words were still distinguishable. The instrument, the telescreen it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. Um, OKN. I love that insight. OKN says the panel is like Squealer telling the figures in propaganda. Exactly. I'm telling you, those of you who were here for even part of Animal Farm are completely at home in this book, right? I mean, I'm so glad we read Animal Farm first because, I mean, we don't even have to do that much homework. We already know, where things are. It's like, okay, that box that's in there is like the propaganda that's continuously streaming in that you have to listen to. You're almost subservient to it. Winston turned a switch and the voice sank somewhat. Listen very closely to this part. Though the words were still distinguishable, the instrument, the telescreen it was called, could be dimmed, but there was no way of shutting it off completely. There was no way of shutting it off. That means you are never experiencing silence. It is a constant stream of propaganda. I mean, God forbid you're outside and then you just hear it from everywhere. But from inside, you now have this thing that you legally are obligated to keep in your house. And it's constantly, you can turn it down a little bit, but there's this constant stream. You can't silence it completely. And the power of silence is so important. If you never have silence, then you can't hear the voice of your intuition, right? And it's a very, very powerful psychological trick not to be able to engage with the right brain and be able to think outside the box, right? That's what the intuition wants you to. It's like, hey, but have you considered this? Have you considered that? The tyrant wants to pressure that out of you to where you're never thinking outside the box, hence the constant noise. He moved over to the window. A smallish, frail figure, the meagerness of his body merely emphasized by the blue overalls which were uniform of the party. His hair was very fair, his face naturally sanguine, his skin roughened by coarse soap and blunt razor blades, and the cold of the winter that had just ended. Outside, even through the shut window pane, the world looked cold. Pay attention here too. Down in the street, little eddies of wind were whirling dust and torn paper into spirals. And though the sun was shining, and though the sky was a harsh blue, there seemed to be no color in anything except the posters that were plastered everywhere. Guys, I want to introduce to you the concept of like a salience landscape. And by salience, I mean importance. If you're listening to the sound of my voice, if you're really paying attention, it means that you've decided to turn off background noises, right? And that's one of the reasons it's such a blessing and a gift to be a recipient of your open, curious attention, because it's like if you give someone your attention, you're giving them permission to change what you find relevant, at least in that moment, right? So, what's so strange and striking about this sentence? Let me read it again. there seemed to be no color in anything except the posters that were plastered everywhere. So, what the tyrant wants to do is to change what you find important, to change what you find relevant, right? Orwell says the sky is like a piercing blue. It's a gorgeous day. The sun is shining. And yet, nothing seems to be colorful from Winston's perspective besides the poster with the piercing eyes that say, Big Brother is watching you, right? Guys, that's one of the most important questions that you can ask yourself is what do I find relevant? I mean, just think about your day. Think about your ordinary day. What is it that you find relevant? You know, sometimes like when I get off work, and especially when I worked at my sales job, I would come in the door and the most salient things in the environment were the couch, I wanted to sit down, the TV, I wanted to watch something, right? And a cold water, right? I just wanted to relax, right? And sometimes the exhaustion got to the extent to where I wouldn't even necessarily say hi to my wife or my 4-year-old. It's like, whoa, is the life you're living changing in a negative way what you find relevant? And I mean, to be honest, this is another part of the genius of George Orwell too. Usually, the hero is somebody with a salience landscape that you want to emulate. You want to find relevant what the hero finds relevant. But in this, you know, we have kind of like a Neo in the Matrix, where when he begins, he's just kind of doing this, whatever, you know, just living life, taking life as it comes. Anyway, the black mustachioed face gazed down from every commanding corner. These are the big posters. There was one on the farmhouse front immediately opposite. Big Brother is watching you, the caption said, while the dark eyes looked deep into Winston's own. Down at the street level, another poster, torn at one corner, flapped fitfully in the wind, alternatively covering and uncovering the single word, Ingsoc. In the far distance, a helicopter skimmed down between the roofs, hovered for an instant like a blue bottle, and darted away again without a curving flight. It was the police patrol, snooping into people's windows. The patrols did not matter, however, only the thought police mattered. Guys, do thought police exist in today's society? Just give me a yes or no. No need to explain. Do thought police exist in today's society? C Lad says yes. I'm getting another yes. I'm getting yes. I haven't gotten a no yet. Yes, 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 yes. Someone says kinda. Okay, you kind of, yep, 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 yes, yes, yes. So I'm getting a stream of yeses that we do have thought police in today's society. Hmm. Interesting. Interesting to notice. And for those of you who said yes, which is so far everybody, Kathy said I might be one. I respect. Yeah, to a degree, yeah. We want to say like, oh, you respect that or you like that. You know, if you're willing to part ways with someone, specifically like a family member or a close friend, based on their opinion, which none of us are necessarily completely immune to, then you might be the thought police yourself. You know, just notice if you're noticing that in society, everyone has said yes so far, or yeah, I can see that, right? So maybe you don't feel as alone as you might have prior. Behind Winston's back, the voice from the telescreen was still babbling away about pig iron and the overfulfillment of the 9 3-year plan. The telescreen received and transmitted simultaneously. Any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it. So this is massive surveillance, right? Uh, So it's possible, guys, to get to a point where absolutely everything you say is broadcast. right? To where there's no privacy whatsoever. But I also want you to notice that it says any sound that Winston made above the level of a very low whisper would be picked up by it, which means that Winston is aware that it doesn't necessarily catch everything. Wherever there are boundaries, and we'll kind of get to the walled garden in a minute. Let me just continue. Moreover, so long as he remained within the field of vision, which the metal plaque commanded, he could be seen as well as heard. There was, of course, no way of knowing whether you were being watched at any given moment. How often or on what system the thought police plugged in on any individual wire was guesswork. It was even conceivable that they watched everybody all the time. But at any rate, they could plug in your wire whenever they wanted to. You had to live, did live, from habit, became the instinct. In the assumption that every sound you made was overheard, and except in darkness, every moment was scrutinized. So, this thing, so you have this box in your house which reports to the government. It reports to the authorities anything that you say. It can see you as long as you're kind of in, there are areas you can hide from it. But this thing in your house, where we're imagining that this thing is in our home, we want to participate in this book and not just listen to it. So imagine this thing is in your home. It hears everything you say above a whisper, and it can actually see you from a lot of different angles. It's difficult to hide from, but you can accomplish hiding from it. And if you speak below a whisper, then it can't necessarily hear you. What's interesting is that it's perceivable that you're just always heard. So no one knows how often they're actually listening in. It's like it's a live stream thing. So someone may not be listening, but you just get the idea that someone's always listening. This is actually called the availability heuristic, and it's a form of bias. Whenever there's a plane crash, and you hear about the plane crash on the news, which is like all plane crashes, airline tickets actually go down. Even though it's very, very unlikely that the plane that you're on will crash, just hearing about a plane crash will cause the number of plane tickets sold to go down. That's the availability heuristic. It's your biology kicking into a mode that says it's better to be safe than sorry, right? And what's interesting is that just by putting in some kind of surveillance, it completely alters your behavior, even though someone might not be listening at the time, right? Winston kept his back turned to the telescreen. It was safer, though, as he well knew, even a back can be revealing. Guys, why is it safer to keep his back turned to the telescreen? Why do you think it's safer? Why do you think he feels safer with his back turned to the telescreen? I mean, it can still hear him in that mode. Dia says, your face talks. For sure. Can't see your facial expression. Right. These are thought police, right? And guys, for those of you who say that thought police actually already exist in society, if what we say is policeable, then how long will it take for thoughts to be policeable as well, right? Isn't I mean, isn't your facial expression kind of like what you're saying? I mean, before we had the ability to speak, we spoke in grunts and facial expressions and body posture. So if someone can actually police what you say, it's not going to be very long before they think that they can police what you think, right? So all of these cautions are very, very relevant and very salient. A kilometer away, the Ministry of Truth, his place of work, towered vast and white above the grimy landscape. This, he thought, with a sort of vague distaste, this was London, chief city of Airstrip 1, itself the third most populous of the provinces of Oceania. He tried to squeeze out some childhood memory. that should tell him whether London had always been quite like this. Were there always these vistas of rotting 19th century houses, their sides shored up with balks of timber, their windows patched with cardboard, and their roofs with corrugated iron, their crazy garden walls sagging in all directions? Guys, it reminds me so much of Animal Farm. Rigger, thank you so much for the super chat. We'll be getting to all of those right after the reading. Um, he is confused. Uh, he's wondering, was it always like this? Were things ever better? Wasn't it just like this in Animal Farm? Right? In Animal Farm, he says, they had no idea if it had always been this way or if something had changed. I mean, at the end of the book, one of the saddest things was um, uh, one of the animals' eyes were fading, and they asked Benjamin, "Has the law always been like this, or have things changed? Something seems to have changed." Um, and trauma can cause your memory to fail. You don't recall what things were like, and we'll get to the reason why on the very next page. And the bombed sites where the plaster dust swirled in the air, and the willow herb straggled over the heaps of rubble, and the places where the bombs had cleared a larger path, and there had sprung up sordid colonies of wooden dwellings like chicken houses. But it was no use. He could not remember. Nothing remained of his childhood except a series of bright lit tableaux, occurring against no background, and mostly unintelligible. Here's the important part. This part's really important. The ministry of truth, mini-true in newspeak, was startlingly different from any other object in sight. It was an enormous pyramidal structure of glittering white concrete, soaring up, terrace after terrace, 300 meters into the air. From where Winston stood, it was just possible to read, picked out on its white face in elegant lettering, the three slogans of the party. Here are the three slogans: war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. Those are the three slogans of the party. So you understand that if war is peace, both of those words are now rendered meaningless. If freedom is slavery, neither of those words have meaning. If ignorance is strength, neither of those words have any meaning anymore. Are we at a point in society where we are rendering words meaningless by how easily we throw them out there? I mean, I think uh, people on the left are called commies. People on the right are called Nazis. You hear the word fascist thrown out. You hear the word bigot thrown out, which is not to say that those labels don't belong somewhere. Hear me out. I'm not saying you should never use powerful words. I'm saying let's stop emptying those words of their power by just casually throwing them out for someone that we don't like, because they become meaningless. And we need those words to have meaning in order to have power. If I can't communicate with you on what I mean by the words that then we've lost power together. The ministry of truth contained, it was said, 3,000 rooms above ground level and corresponding ramifications below. Scattered about London, there were just three other buildings of similar appearance and size. So completely did they dwarf the surrounding architecture that from the roof of Victory Mansions you could see all four of them simultaneously. They were the homes of the four ministries between which the entire apparatus of government was divided: the Ministry of Truth, which concerned itself with news, entertainment, education, and the fine arts; the Ministry of Peace, which concerned itself with war; the Ministry of Love, which maintained law and order, and the Ministry of Plenty, which was responsible for economic affairs. Their names in Newspeak, Many True, Many Pax, Many Love, and Many Plenty. The Ministry of Love was the really frightening one. Guys, it says the Ministry of Love was the really frightening one. That breaks my brain because the least frightening thing is love. Like love and fear are almost opposites. You know where it says the laws, war is peace, freedom is slavery, ignorance is strength. I think if they were to put a fourth one in there, it would be love is fear. But it says the ministry of love was the really frightening one. There were no windows in it at all. Winston had never been inside the ministry of love, nor within half a kilometer of it. It was a place impossible to enter except on official business. Dia said, "Love is hate." Yeah, no, I think that that would definitely be more opposite, guys. Is and that's a tough one, right? Love is hate, but I think hate is driven by fear. I almost want to say the opposite of love is fear, but I do think, yeah, the opposite of love being hate is like completely intuitive. The ministry of love was the really frightening one. There were no windows. Winston had never been inside or within a half a kilometer. It was a place impossible to enter except on official business, and then only by penetrating through a maze of barbed wire entanglements, steel doors, and hidden machine gun nests. Even the streets leading up to its outer barriers were roamed by gorilla faced guards in black uniforms armed with jointed truncheons. Listen to this, the ministry of love. First of all, the word ministry literally just means function. The function of service, right? Like there are ministries in America and the prime minister. It really is a function. But ministry also gives you kind of a religious connotation. It's like this is a minister. You're talking to minister so and so. Ministries, and I don't think that that's on accident either. Everything is a double speak in this book. So it's important to remember all of those things. But at the same time, look at how difficult Orwell is saying it is to get into the ministry of love. Look how difficult he's saying this is. He says it was a place impossible to enter except on official business, and then only by penetrating through a maze of barbed wire entanglements, steel doors, and hidden machine gun nests. Even the streets leading up to its outer barriers were roamed by gorilla faced guards in black uniforms, armed with jointed truncheons. How many of you feel like that today? How many of you guys feel like, and because for me, love is the felt recognition of our shared being. I will always borrow from the phenomenologist Rupert Spira, one of the greatest spiritual leaders alive today, in my opinion. He says, love is the felt recognition of our shared being, which is almost to say, it's the felt understanding that even though we seem to be different, that's an illusion. And it goes kind of back to Hinduism and all that stuff, the Eastern philosophies. But if love is the recognition that you and I are one and the same, of course the tyrant is going to guard us from that with all of the strength of the tyranny, right? Um, because how powerful does that make us? Recognizing that we all want the same thing, that the side that doesn't agree with you is still trying to make the world better in a way that just doesn't seem to make sense to you right now. Feeling like we are all that shared being, the tyrant does not want that. The tyrant does not want us figuring out that we're stronger together. And so that's the reason he makes it so hard to enter the ministry of love. Machine guns, barriers, gorilla face guards, black uniforms. It's like it's putting all of its resources into stopping that from happening. Anyway, I thought that was very powerful. Winston turned round abruptly. He had set his features into the expression of quiet optimism, which it was advisable to wear when facing the telescreen. He crossed the room into the tiny kitchen. That facial expression of quiet optimism is almost like, I imagine it's like this face. Not too expressive. It's not sad. It's not overly happy. Right? It's not something that's going to draw attention. But another one of the reasons that the elites want you to kind of just have this face of quiet optimism is because then you can't trust your brothers and sisters. If everyone has the same face on, regardless of what's happening, regardless of the tyranny, everyone's just kind of wearing this kind of same zombie-like face of, quiet contentment. Uh, you can't gauge what someone else is feeling. Um, and so it destroys compassion too at the same time. He crossed the room into the tiny kitchen. By leaving the ministry at this time of day, he had sacrificed his lunch in the canteen, and he was aware that there was no food in the kitchen except a hunk of dark colored bread, which had got to be saved for tomorrow's breakfast. Guys, I want to take just a second here. Am I still audible to everyone? Give me the big brother eyes. Okay, good. Everyone says yes. Okay, fantastic. We're squared away. So Winston turned round abruptly. He had set his features into the expression of quiet optimism, which it was advisable to wear when facing the telescreen. He crossed the room into the tiny kitchen. By leaving the ministry at this time of day, he had sacrificed his lunch in the canteen, and he was aware that there was no food in the kitchen except a hunk of dark colored bread, which had got to be saved for tomorrow's breakfast. He took down from the shelf a bottle of colorless liquid with a plain white label marked Victory Gin. It gave off a sickly, oily smell as if of a Chinese rice spirit. Winston poured out nearly a teacupful, nerved himself for a shock, and gulped it down like a dose of medicine. Instantly, his face turned scarlet and the water ran out of his eyes. The stuff was like nitric acid, and moreover, in swallowing it, one had the sensation of being hit on the back of the head with a rubber club. The next moment, however, the burning in his belly died down, and the world began to look more cheerful. Hmm. Drug and alcohol abuse is definitely another sign of bad times. My question to you guys is this: why are alcohol and cigarettes allowed? This is Victory Gin, so it's purchasable, I guess. It's disgusting. I mean, he says, I mean, this is a disgusting stuff. It gave off a sickly, oily smell as if a Chinese rice spirit. Why is it allowed? Emily says to numb people. Phantom says to dull the senses. Bell says to pacify, numbing, keep people's moods down, pacification. Yeah. Jolie says to make people addicts. That's interesting. To help manipulate them, to prevent critical thought. Guys, the nerd nation. I love it. I love how engaged we are in this, right? We want the insights. I think everyone is right to beat into submission, distraction, to control. Another reason as well that they might be allowing this alcohol, sometimes doesn't alcohol make you let your guard down a little bit, right? Maybe this tyranny wants to see who you really are. I want to see what you're really thinking. I know you turn away from the cameras when you want to roll your eyes or make a facial expression, but I want you to go ahead and drink a little bit of the Victory Gin and let out your true intentions, right? Let me see who you really are. Remember, this is a system which is very paranoid, right? They're very paranoid. They want to come get you. They want you to make a mistake almost, right? And they want to see how deeply their talents have gone into your mind. This whole system wants to really create a zombie out of you so that it can put its personality into you. It wants you to be boxer. For those of you who were with us with Animal Farm, all the way up until the end, Boxer's mantra was "I will work harder. Napoleon is always right." Right? And so maybe they are letting you have alcohol. So it's like, yeah, let your guard down. Let me see what you really think. Right? Let me see if we've really got you. Nikki says, how many people slipped up after a sip up? Yeah. Yeah. Maria, Nerd Nation. That might have to be that might have to be uh you know, Nerd Nation might have to be. I love that. So let's continue. So he's drinking the gin, and the world began to look more cheerful. He took a cigarette from a crumpled packet marked Victory Cigarettes and incautiously held it upright, whereupon the tobacco fell out onto the floor. With the next, he was more successful. He went back to the living room and sat down at a small table that stood to the left of the telescreen. From the table drawer, he took out a pen holder, a bottle of ink, and a thick quarto-size blank book with a red back and a marble cover. For some reason, the telescreen in the living room was in an unusual position. Instead of being placed, it was, as was normal, in the end wall, where it could command the whole room. It was in the longer wall opposite the window. To one side of it, there was a shallow alcove in which Winston was now sitting, and which, when the flats were built, had probably been intended to hold bookshelves. By sitting in the alcove and keeping well back, Winston was able to remain outside the range of the telescreen, so far as sight went. Yak says, who moved the telescreen? I have no idea. Um, thank you, C-Lad. C-Lad said Nerd Nation is already taken. That's fair. Um, guys, we talk about paradise. The literal meaning of paradise is the walled garden, right? The garden is where we can explore and where we can uh, let out our curiosity. And the walls represent boundaries. So, in order to have a good conversation with someone, you need enough space to explore that person, but you also need boundaries. That's, so like, hey, these are my boundaries, right? And the better you are at understanding the boundaries and exploring, the more you will have this paradise experience. And there will always be a group of people who are testing the boundaries. And I find that fascinating about human beings, whether the people are enslaved, whether the people are in some kind of oppressive system, you can guarantee that there are people who are pushing the boundaries. It's one of the things that I've started to love about rock and roll music. It's like, rock and roll and hip hop are just about sometimes testing the boundaries, sometimes just seeing how hard I can kick the boundaries, right? Um, and even in this, it's something I love about what Orwell is trying to teach us. It's like the tyrant is justifiably paranoid. We're going to have to read Pedagogy of the Oppressed at some point, uh, because I think Paulo Freire, who wrote that book, is right in assuming that human beings, you can't kill the spirit. We are always going to be searching for ways to push the boundaries if they are too tight, right? And it's just fascinating to me that Winston, even though he's in this super oppressive system, he knows, okay, if I stand over here, then the telescreen can't see me. And if I talk at this level, the telescreen can't hear me, right? There's always a part of us that's plotting to push the boundaries. So let that give you hope as we go deeper into this darkness. He could be heard, of course, but so long as he stayed in his present position, he could not be seen. It was partly the unusual geography of the room that had suggested to him the thing that he was now about to do. But it had also been suggested by the book that he had just taken out of the drawer. It was a peculiarly beautiful book. Its smooth, creamy paper, a little yellowed by age, was of a kind that had not been manufactured for at least 40 years past. He could guess, however, that the book was much older than that. He had seen it lying in the window of a frowsy little junk shop in a slummy quarter of the town, just what quarter he did not now remember, and had been stricken immediately by an overwhelming desire to possess it. Party members were supposed not to go into ordinary shops, dealing on the free market, it was called. But the rule was not strictly kept, because there were various things such as shoelaces and razor blades, which it was impossible to get a hold of in any other way. He had given a quick glance up and down the street, and then had slipped inside and bought the book for $2.50. This part was really difficult to imagine for me, but it's important for me to let you know that it's like, imagine being in such a tyrannical society that owning a diary is something you're deeply grateful for and you have to hide. Like, we take so much for granted, right? And there's a Buddhist practice um, about right attention and kind of restoring relevance to things. I was like, I've had to do this with my daughter because she has so many toys. It's like, are we negatively impacting her ability to be grateful because she has so much? We could get to a point where we're grateful for like ink pens and pencils and writing utensils. It could really get that tight. At the time, he was not conscious of wanting it for any particular reason. Kat, thank you so much for that super chat. It means a lot and it helps a lot. I will be getting to those at the end of this reading. So, anybody who leaves a super chat, I deeply appreciate it and we will get to it. He had carried it guiltily home in his briefcase, even with nothing written in it. It was a compromising possession. The thing that he was about to do was to open a diary. This was not illegal. Listen to this. Check this part out. This was not illegal. Nothing was illegal since there were no longer any laws. But if detected, it was reasonably certain that it would be punished by death, or at least by 25 years in a forced labor camp. So what they're saying is like, look, we don't live according to laws. Everyone is free. But we'll just find that you're not useful, and the more powerful among us will come and get you, right? So this takes it a step further than Animal Farm, right? In Animal Farm, there were like the 7 laws, and they were just like, we'll change the laws as we see fit. At this point, they're like, oh yeah, there are no laws, but just make sure you keep up with what Big Brother wants and what Big Brother expects of you. Winston fitted a nib into the pen holder and sucked it to get the grease off. The pen was an archaic instrument, seldom used even for signatures, and he had procured one, furtively and with some difficulty, simply because of a feeling that the beautiful creamy paper deserved to be written on with a real nib instead of being scratched with an ink pencil. Actually, he was not used to writing by hand, apart from the very short notes. It was usual to dictate everything into the speak right, which was, of course, impossible for his present purpose. So the speak right is a journal which is overheard by the authorities. Like, imagine having a diary, right? And you have to speak into the diary, into the hearing of all of the authorities, right? So, I mean, so here it is. He dipped his pen into the ink and then faltered for just a second. A tremor had gone through his bowels. To mark the paper was the decisive act. In small, clumsy letters, he wrote, April 4th, 1984. Guys, this decision is the no turning back point for our hero. This is the point of no return. This is a classic part of all heroes' journeys, right? The hero's journey begins with with the ordinary world. Then there's a call to adventure. Then there's a refusal. Then there's a mentor. Usually, mentors are people like Yoda or Rafiki. People who help you overcome your refusal to answer the call to action. Then there's tests, allies, and enemies. The innermost cave, the ordeal, the reward, the resurrection, and the elixir. But there's the crossing the threshold point. So there's the ordinary world, the call to adventure, the refusal, the mentor, and then the crossing the threshold. Crossing the threshold is the point of no return, where you've made a decision you can't come back from. By writing in this journal, Winston has decided, like, I'm someone who's willing to risk my life for the freedom that I need, right? It's kind of like a give me liberty or give me death decision. And I want you to put yourself in the mind or in the mentality of someone who, uh, put yourself in the mind of a woman who just took on this big, career decision and then finds out that she's pregnant, or a high schooler that finds out that she's pregnant. Doesn't that kind of change the trajectory of where she thought she would be? I mean, at least it can. Imagine someone who just got signed to the NBA and then breaks his leg, like complex fracture, right? Um, or someone who, whose father and grandfather were attorneys and they have like this practice and he just failed the bar exam, right? And I know, I mean, you can eventually take the bar exam again, but you get the point. There are points of like, now what I thought the future was going to be like has now just become a big question mark. You've now like, you're in touch with a different version of the future now. Guys, there's 115 people here right now, and that's a record for this channel. So we're doing something right. Let's keep going. He sat back. A sense of complete helplessness had descended upon him. To begin with, he did not know with any certainty that it was 1984. It must be around that date, since he was fairly sure that his age was 39, and he believed that he had been born in 1944 or 1945. But it was never possible nowadays to pin down any date within a year. Guys, we're beginning this book deep into tyranny. Without knowing what date it is, how is it possible to track progress or regress? How do you know whether things are getting better or worse if you don't know what year it is? Like you can have like this subtle sensation. It's like, I don't think this was happening. But it's like if you don't know what year it is, also, when I read this point, I did a little bit of background research, guys, and I just asked myself, how did humans actually advance from the calendar? Why is the calendar so important to us? And what would happen if we never had that, right? The calendar gives us the ability to plan agriculturally, right? We can know what seasons to plant this in, what season is coming, what happened last year as opposed to this year and how to adjust for things like that. But the tyrant doesn't want you to have control over agricultural planning. It also gives us the ability to set holidays. Holidays are really important so that it can remind us that the spirit of what we're doing is more important than any individual one of us, right? Isn't that what we're doing right now? Nobody in this live chat or in this experience is more important than anybody else. And we realize that because we're allowed to come together, because we know what things used to be like and how things are progressing and regressing. And also meetings. That's another big part of it. If we can't have calendars, how can we meet up, right? Even this meeting right now was because this was placed on a calendar. and people like clicked on it. And so a lot of people kind of see it and join the live stream. Hello, thank you for doing that. But a lot of people, the majority of us, is like, okay, put this on a calendar, and without that, guys, we're so much more susceptible to tyranny. So thank God for calendars. For whom it suddenly occurred to him to wonder, was he writing the diary for the future, for the unborn? His mind hovered for a moment round the doubtful date on the page, and then fetched up with a bump against the newspeak word doublethink. For the first time, the magnitude of what he had undertaken came home to him. How could you communicate with the future? It was of its nature impossible. Either the future would resemble the present, in which case it would not listen to him, or it would be different from it, and his predicament would be meaningless. That is probably the scariest sentence in this chapter. I'm going to read it again. He says, either the future would resemble the present, in which case it wouldn't listen to him, or it would be different from the present, and his predicament would be meaningless. Guys, imagine getting a letter from a victim of a tyranny, right? Let's say that someone just was writing from, you know, this tyrannical government, and they wrote you a letter. And in the letter, war means peace, slavery means freedom. How can you possibly read that in any sensible way? You'd open it and you'd be like, I know that in that culture, words mean the opposite of things. So is he telling me that everything's okay? Is he telling me that everything's not okay? Right? How can you actually express anything? Right? And that's actually part of the tyranny, right? He's like, what am I actually writing? What am I actually doing? So the tyranny is psychological too. I just want to do one more quick check in. Am I still audible? I got C. All good. Fantastic. We continue. For some time, he sat gazing stupidly at the paper. The telescreen had changed over to strident military music. It was curious that he seemed not merely to have lost the power of expressing himself, but even to have forgotten what it was that he had originally intended to say. For weeks past, he had been making ready for this moment, and it had never crossed his mind that anything would be needed except courage. The actual writing would be easy. All he had to do was to transfer to paper the interminable, restless monologue that had been running inside his head literally for years. At this moment, however, even the monologue had dried up. Moreover, his varicose ulcer had been itching unbearably. He dared not scratch it, because if he did so, it always became inflamed. Guys, the varicose ulcer means that there's poor blood flow, right? That's what a varicose ulcer is. It's poor it's poor blood flow to that area, which requires freedom of movement. Isn't his ulcer kind of symbolic of his situation? It's like Orwell, I don't think does these kinds of things on accident. He has something in his body, on his body, which reflects his plight. And look, it says he dared not scratch it. This is this itching ulcer, right? He says he dare not scratch it because if he did so, it always becomes inflamed, right? He needs to express himself. Something needs to flow out of him, right? And when he says he won't scratch it because if he does so, it always becomes inflamed. Not writing will only make your expression, your desire to express yourself worse, right? So him writing down his thoughts is going to be like this symbolic thing. It's like I have to get what I really think out. The seconds were ticking by. He was conscious of nothing except the blankness of the page in front of him, the itching of the skin above his ankle, the blaring of the music, and a slight booziness caused by the gin. Suddenly, he began writing in sheer panic, only imperfectly aware of what he was setting down. His small but childish handwriting straggled up and down the page, shedding first its capital letters and finally even its full stops. April 4th, 1984. Last night to the flicks. All war films. One very good one of a ship full of refugees being bombed somewhere in the Mediterranean. This is what he's writing down, right? I should do this in an English accent because, it's going to require it here at the end. Because he says, April 4th, 1984, last night to the flicks, all war films. One very good one of a ship full of refugees being bombed somewhere in the Mediterranean. Audience much amused by shots of a great, huge, fat man trying to swim away with a helicopter after him. First, you saw him wallowing along in the water like a porpoise. Then you saw him through the helicopter's gun sights. Then he was full of holes, and the sea round him turned pink, and he sank as suddenly as though the holes had let in the water. Audience shouting with laughter when he sank. Then you saw a lifeboat full of children with a helicopter hovering over it. There was a middle-aged woman, might have been a Jewess, sitting up in the bow with a little boy about 3 years old in her arms. Little boy screaming with fright and hiding his head between her breasts as if he was trying to burrow right into her, and the woman putting her arms around him and comforting him, although she was blue with fright herself. All the time covering him up as much as possible, as if she, though her arms could keep the bullets off him, as if she thought her arms could keep the bullets off him. Then the helicopter planted a 20-kilo bomb in among them, terrible flash, and the boat went all to matchwood. Then there was a wonderful shot of a child's arm going up, 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 right up into the air. A helicopter with a camera in its nose must have followed it up, and there was a lot of applause from the party seats. But a woman down in the pro part of the house suddenly started kicking up a fuss and shouting, "They didn't ought to have showed it. Not in front of the kids, they didn't. It ain't right, not in front of kids, it ain't." Until the police turned her around. Oh, until the police turned her out. I don't suppose anything happened to her. Nobody cares what the pros say. A typical pro reaction, they never. Why did he stop? Winston stopped writing, partly because he was suffering from cramp. He did not know what made him pour out this stream of rubbish. Why did he stop writing? Why do you think he stopped writing? What caused him to stop? If you were following the story that he told. I mean, he's telling a story about going to the movie and seeing something and a woman having a reaction. Empathy, conditioning, realization, fear. His inner censor took over. Ron, I completely agree with the inner censor, right? He caught himself, right, Julie? He was telling a story. He was just doing this stream of consciousness. Emily, I agree, afraid to say it out loud because he's telling this story about this really violent movie that a child is allowed to watch in this theater. And the mother is like trying to shield her child from this violent film. And then she finally stands up and says something. She finally stands up and speaks out and says, this shouldn't be shown to children. And, somebody mentioned that it was a Cockney accent she had. She's saying, ain't, so she's lower class. and, uh, and then the police arrested her. But he starts to then kind of do this thing where he's taking up for the police. He kind of starts saying, I mean, look at the end of this. He says, until the police turned her out. I don't suppose anything happened to her. Nobody cares what the proles say, typical prole reaction, they never, and then he stops, right? There's a part of him, because of the screwing around with language and because of all the psychological tyranny that he's under, he can't really write that long from his own perspective. It becomes the perspective of the party. It's mixed in, it's gotten kind of into his blood a little bit. Self censorship. Gigi, I completely agree. He remembered consequences on some level. Yak, absolutely. But the curious thing was that while he was doing so, a totally different memory had clarified itself in his mind, to the point where he almost felt equal to writing it down. It was, he now realized, because of this other incident that he had suddenly decided to come home and begin the diary today. It had happened that morning at the ministry, if anything so nebulous could be said to happen. It was nearly 1100, and in the records department where Winston worked, they were dragging the chairs out of the cubicles and grouping them in the center of the hall, opposite the big telescreen, in preparation for the 2 minutes hate. Winston was just taking his place in one of the middle rows when two people whom he knew by sight but had never spoken to came unexpectedly into the room. One of them was a girl whom he often passed in the corridors. He did not know her name, but he knew that she worked in the fiction department. Presumably, since he had sometimes seen her with oily hands and carrying a spanner. She had some mechanical job on one of the novel writing machines. She was a bold-looking girl of about 27, with thick, dark hair, a freckled face, and swift, athletic movements. A narrow scarlet sash, emblem of the Junior Anti-Sex League, was wound several times around the waist of her overalls, just tightly enough to bring out the shapeliness of her hips. Winston had disliked her from the very first moment of seeing her. He knew the reason. Guys, I think it's not very complicated to imagine why there might be like an anti-sex league, right? Sex has the potential to create uh, loyalty. It's the most intimate thing that you can do socially, and it has the potential to create a sense of loyalty. However, I think in our society, specifically on the West, that may be, it's like sex is just a little bit too casual. I mean, I don't know. I'm a man of a certain age. I'm 38 years old, but we've almost, a lot of the Western cultures have kind of emptied sex of the meaning, of the, dare I say, the uh, sacredness, uh, so that maybe it might be allowed in one of today's tyrannies. Um, but what's fascinating is that even though all of them have to wear uniforms in support of the party, she's allowed to wear uniforms which are tight and reveal her shapeliness. Why would something like that be allowed? And it has a reaction in Winston, like he hates her, right? And it'll say in a couple of sentences that he hates pretty women in general. I feel like Shanti, Shanti says maybe it's a test. Someone says, I think she's bait to get information from anyone who gives in. You guys are thinking exactly what I'm thinking. It's so crazy. It's like we're all separate people, but we're thinking on the exact same track. Like I almost feel like she is the same thing as the alcohol. Like, I want to see if you can let your guard down. I want you to let your guard down. I want to see who you really are. I want to see if you're so loyal to the party that we can have these women with kind of tight fitting, shapely outfits, and you still are obedient and still do the things that we say. We want to turn you inside out. He knew the reason. It was because of the atmosphere of hockey fields and cold baths and community hikes and general clean mindedness which she managed to carry about with her. He disliked nearly all women, and especially the young and pretty ones. It was always the women, and above all the young ones, who were the most bigoted adherents of the party, the swallowers of slogans. Guys, I remember when I wasn't getting it was very difficult for me to get the attention of women, like in high school. And you know, when you're, my big brother, he's a military guy. He was always ROTC. My brother never had that problem. But in high school, it's like I couldn't get the attention of girls. Are you kidding me? Complete and total nerd. And it did kind of settle in me this irritation with women. It's like, because either you're irritated with them or you have to admit that there's something about yourself that you that needs to change. And the former story is a lot easier than the latter, you know? uh, it was always the women, and above all the young ones, who were the most bigoted adherents of the party, the swallowers of slogans. So you hear him complaining about women. The amateur spies and nosers out of unorthodoxy. But this particular girl gave him the impression of being more dangerous than most. Once, when they passed in the corridor, she had given him a quick sidelong glance, which seemed to pierce right into him, and for a moment had filled him with a black terror. The idea had even crossed his mind that she might be an agent of the thought police. Guys, why not? Why wouldn't she be, right? As someone who's kind of just put in there to make you let your guard down and, get in there with your inmost thoughts. And that, it was true, was very unlikely. Still, he continued to feel a peculiar uneasiness, which had fear mixed up in it as well as hostility, whenever she was anywhere near him. The other person was a man named O'Brien, a member of the inner party, and holder of some post so important and remote that Winston had only a dim idea of its nature. A momentary hush passed over the group of people round the chairs as they saw the black overalls of an inner party member approaching. O'Brien was a large, burly man with a thick neck and a coarse, humorous, brutal face. In spite of his formidable appearance, he had a certain charm of manner. He had a trick of resetting his spectacles on his nose, which was curiously disarming. In some indefinable way, curiously civilized. It was a gesture which, if anyone had still thought in such terms, might have recalled an 18th century nobleman offering his snuff box. It's tough to get mentally into the place that George Orwell is kind of trying to put us, because we read facial expressions, right? The look on my face tells you about what I'm feeling. If we were like sitting down at a coffee shop and you see the look on my face, you can read my tone of voice. All of those things matter. You can gauge what I'm feeling inside. But in this, I mean, the thought police are walking around. You don't know whether someone is like this paid actor type of thing, or someone, of the elites just trying to make sure that no one is causing trouble. You can't trust anything about anybody. And we are so desperate for connection. I mean, we're connection seekers almost as a defining characteristic of who we are. Um, it's just kind of a maddening reality to live under. I mean, O'Brien's it just seems like O'Brien's character, someone who you just want to maybe have a beer with, or someone who seems really disarming, that just makes him even more of a threat in this kind of environment. Winston had seen O'Brien perhaps a dozen times in almost as many years. He felt deeply drawn to him, and not solely because he was intrigued by the contrast between O'Brien's urbane manner and his prize fighter's physique. Much more, it was because of a secretly held belief, or perhaps not even a belief, merely a hope, that O'Brien's political orthodoxy was not perfect. Something in his face suggested it irresistibly. And again, Perhaps it was not even unorthodoxy that was written in his face, but simply intelligence. At any rate, he had the appearance of being a person that you could talk to if somehow you could cheat the telescreen and get him alone. Winston had never made the smallest effort to verify this guess. Indeed, there was no way of doing so. At this moment, O'Brien glanced at his wristwatch, saw that it was nearly 1100, and evidently decided to stay in the records department until the 2 minutes hate was over. He took a chair in the same row as Winston, a couple of places away. A small, sandy haired woman who worked in the next cubicle to Winston was between them. The girl with dark hair was sitting immediately behind. The next moment, a hideous, grinding screech, as of some monstrous machine running without oil, burst from the big telescreen at the end of the room. It was a noise that set one's teeth on edge and bristled the hair at the back of one's neck. The hate had started. The hate had started. As usual, the face of Emmanuel Goldstein. Guys, once you know who Emmanuel Goldstein is, just say it in the chat. As usual, the face of Emmanuel Goldstein, the enemy of the people, had flashed onto the screen. There were hisses here and there among the audience. The little sandy-haired woman gave a squeak of mingled fear and disgust. Somebody already said it. Goldstein was the renegade and backslider who once long ago, how long ago nobody knows, had been one of the leading figures of the party, almost on a level with Big Brother himself, and then had engaged in counter-revolutionary activities, had been condemned to death, and had mysteriously escaped and disappeared. The program of the 2 minutes hate varied from day to day, but there was none in which Goldstein was not the principal figure. He was the primal traitor, the earliest defiler of the party's purity. All subsequent crimes against the party, all treacheries and acts of sabotage, heresies, deviations sprang directly out of his teaching. And now we have Snowball back. Somebody said Snowball lives, right? Somewhere or other, he was still alive and hatching his conspiracies, perhaps somewhere beyond the sea, under the protection of his foreign paymasters, perhaps even, so it was occasionally rumored, in some hiding place in Oceania itself. Guys, that's it for today's reading. Thank you for being here. I do want to say there's 4 things that I want us to leave with. Until the next time we're here, there's 4 things that I want us to all leave with from this chapter. Number 1, what was your threshold moment? It's a good time in our lives to recollect on those points of no return. For me, when I visited the Saku Gakkai temple, it's a Nichiren Buddhist temple in Colorado Springs. And when I went into the Nichiren Buddhist temple, my desire was to convert all of them to Calvinism. I have to laugh whenever I say it because it's like from where I am now, that seems like such an arrogant endeavor. But that was my goal. I was going to go into this Buddhist temple and convince them all to be Calvinist Christians. And guys, going into that temple, like the people that I met there completely changed my life. And they I don't even think they were intending to do so. They were just good people who understood that what I genuinely needed was open, curious attention. They planted a splinter in my mind that caused, and it's just revolutionized the person who I became as a result of knowing them. So it's a good time to reflect, and I would love to hear it from you. Join us in the Discord after this is over if you can, if you have some availability. But be meditating. By the time we come back here, I want you to have meditated on what was my threshold moment? What was my moment where I decided to write in the diary or do something that I knew I wouldn't come back from? The transformative moment. So that's number one. Number two, I want you to think about what do you feel bad about that's a result of societal programming? Remember, you have a biological self that wants to resist pain and that wants immediate pleasure and gratification. You have a logical self that wants the truth instead of lies, but then you have a cultural self that wants pride instead of shame. So, something that this chapter wants us to ask ourselves is how much of your personality is a result of societal programming? And it's not necessarily all negative. There should be a portion of you which is dedicated to what the group needs, right? You're not just an individual, right? You're also a member of a society. You have a responsibility to the greater society, right? But just take that off autopilot and stare it in the face. And so the question for number 2 is what do you feel bad about as a result of societal programming? Number 3, what can bring you into a state of cognitive limitation? You remember the 2 minutes of hate, right? A picture popped up on the screen and suddenly everyone is hissing and shaking their fist and pissed off, unable to even think outside of this giant hive mind that they've become. So the third thing I want you to think about before we return to this book is what is it that if it flashed on the screen would cause that same reaction in me? Because if something can trigger you like that, I don't think anybody should have that much control over you. No one should be able to cause you to be stressed on a dime just by showing you something or just by saying something. You should have total control over your cognitive availability. And that's not saying that you shouldn't experience anger ever or that you shouldn't experience sadness ever, right? There's a time to have empathy. There's a time to be angry. There's a time to be sad. Those emotions are relevant. I'm just saying that shouldn't be in the control of like a corporation. That shouldn't be in control of like a politician. A politician shouldn't be able to say, "Hey, turn on your anger." Right? Thank you very much. I can use that. I'm saying don't become a commodity. So that's number 3. What can bring you into a state of cognitive limitation? That's the third thing to be thinking about. And lastly, number 4, who is the snowball in your life? Who's that person who you just can't stand? And you don't have to say any of this stuff out loud. These are just things that we should all take off of autopilot and stare at them. Figure out what they're telling us about ourselves, about how, and because I think this book is supposed to be freeing. The lessons that you can learn in it, you know. Uh, but this is going to be a crazy journey. And the chapters are way longer than they were in Animal Farm. Guys, I deeply appreciate you being here. I am going to check out the super chats. Thank you, everyone who was able to send in a super chat. It definitely helps the channel out a lot. Guys, Epiphany members and Insight members, fantastic. Thank you so much for the memberships. I will not let you down. I won't say I won't let you down. I'm a human being. I'll definitely let you down, but I will try not to let you down as often as one might if they didn't care. Thank you so much. I deeply appreciate it. Uh, Jenny says, I'm on time today. You were on time. Thank you so much for the $5 super chat and for being on time, comrade. Right? Those of you who were late owe me apples, milk, whiskey, and the corpses of your exhausted compatriots so that I can trade them for glue. Send them to the knackers. Phantom, thank you so much. Phantom, if you guys see Phantom, give him a hug. Phantom has helped so much with this channel. It's absurd. The Discord, so he even, was willing to just give me like a couple hours of his time to learn what the heck I was doing on Discord. So the people who are willing to lend a helping hand to this growing thing are completely invaluable to me. Thank you so very much. Rigor mortis tortoise. I think this is rigor mortis tortoise. I hope it's not just rigor mortis. I think it's, but it says, it's a different book, but we've always been at war with East Asia. It's a different book, but we've always been at war with East Asia. I wish I knew what that meant exactly. So feel free to clarify that. I want to know what you're getting at there. Fubar, thank you so much for the 20 euro super chat. 1984 never seemed as pertinent as today. Thanks for reading it and your thoughts. Yeah, it's something about George Orwell. Like I really think, and I'll say this, right? Because a lot of people don't believe in the existence of prophets, right? People say, "Oh, I don't believe in prophecy. That's magical, mystical stuff." Guys, prophets exist, and they don't use magic to prophesy. They're just certain people that I mean, like, imagine we were looking through a little keyhole and we saw like whiskers and fur in front of the keyhole. And I said, "Hey, you know what? I predict that a tail is coming." You know, so you might, oh, that's prophecy. How did you know? The tail came, right? But prophets are just people who have seen it before. It's like this, like, oh yeah, I've studied history. I'm in touch with perennial patterns. I know that this is coming up. If this stays this way, if this trajectory continues, then this is what's going to come. And I feel like George Orwell was definitely someone who was living in that spirit. So yeah, I completely agree, Fubar. Thanks for the super chat. I deeply appreciate it. Joanne is goated. I mean, everyone who, I mean, she shares, you know, what I post on YouTube into the Discord so that I don't have to. Joanne is someone who just takes a huge, huge burden off of my shoulders as it pertains to the channel, doing it all selflessly, and gifted 10 memberships. I deeply appreciate you and all that you do. Welcome to all the Insight members. Rigor Mortis again said, as someone with ADHD, I respectfully disagree that turning off background noise allows for full attention. Hey, I would love to have that conversation with you. Some people, there's a song called White Noise by Joyner Lucas, and he says the same thing. I need to do a reaction to that song. Joyner Lucas's album is fire, but his album is called ADHD, and he has a song called White Noise where he says, you know, it's way too late and I can't think straight. I got to drown it out with this white noise, and he's talking about how white noise gives him peace. And so, yeah, thanks for bringing that up. It's a relevant insight. And thank you again for the next super chat. He said, I've often wondered at the coincidence of this being set in London, where CCTV cameras everywhere, when it was written decades before CCTV. Somebody needs to send me a DM either on Instagram or wherever. Get a hold of me about the CCTV thing. I'm very, very interested. That sounds creepy. Kat Smith, thanks for the super chat. Kat says, for tinfoil to make hats, block Big Brother. You know what? We should have, that would be crazy. Wouldn't that be like the craziest merch if there was a hat that just had like a tinfoil hat? So it's like you're wearing a tinfoil hat, but it's like a cap, but it's like a tinfoil hat. I think that would be legit. Blocking Big Brother out. Alyssa says, I'd like to say a big thank you. I cannot sit through books anymore, and I've always wanted to read this. Thank you so much for saying that. That kind of encouragement just gives me exactly what I need to continue, because if this helps one person digest the insights in this book, I think that's really what matters. So definitely share, tell anyone else who feels like you to go ahead and join. We're going to be doing this on a not a bi-weekly basis. Twice a week isn't bi-weekly. That's twice a week. We're going to be doing this twice a week. Ruffs, thank you for the $3 super chat. I deeply appreciate that. And that was just for the love. Mel Patterson said, I have to go. But thank you, Mr. Biscuit, to you for your time. Is everyone okay? I got my mug and it's great quality. Remember, Big Brother is always watching. I love everyone from the Animal Farm Book Club. We completely, in our blaming of Snowball, we set up our own inside joke community. Completely love it. Jennifer Baldwin says, "Great first session." Yeah, this book just throws us in there. Usually, even in Animal Farm, it kind of gave us at least a couple of pages where you kind of got the normal world. 1984 was just like, okay, let me just throw you inside the weeds. You are in mass tyranny immediately from page one, chapter one. So yeah, definitely deep right out of the gate in the first session. Thanks so much, Jennifer, for that super chat. I appreciate it. Um, Rigamortis says, spoilers, sorry, we're not there yet. No problem. Kim Anu says, Nerd Nation Book Cult is the best. Nerd Nation Book Cult is wild. People would have no idea whether to join or to avoid. Sin says, this book pulls no punches. Absolutely not. It's like I almost feel like Orwell like wanted to say something in it because I believe Animal Farm was written before 1984. If I'm wrong, I'm going to be so mad. Was 1984, and I'm going to ask the Oracle. I shouldn't call ChatGPT the Oracle. Was 1984 written after Animal Farm?
Yes, 1984 was written after Animal Farm.
Okay, gotcha. Yeah, it was the perfect it was the perfect book to read first was Animal Farm because now we already know. It's like there's no more guessing. We're in it, figuring out what it takes to get out of it. And it's probably going to take, I imagine, maybe a month and a half to 2 months to get all the way through this book. Are there any questions? Are there any insights, questions, concerns, confusions, anything that I can try my best to make sense of, and or that anyone else can make sense of? If there's any questions, I'd be happy to uh, address them. Emily says we are both a cult and a book club now. We come full circle. Renegades get me. Guys, I'm so crazy psyched. Do you know that tomorrow is when Ren is dropping Vincent's tale? It's going to be absolute madness. And we're still doing apples and milk in the chat. It's going to be apples and milk. Apples and milk is just a funny emoji. So apples and milk is not going to turn into the watching eyes. Yeah, you're definitely going to see me there. Rin is up to something crazy. I mean, I'm just so excited to be living in an era where the kind of artist that Rin is doing work because it's going to lift us all up. Gigi says, "Could you repeat the first phrase dropped tonight?" I just don't have understand the words used. The first phrase, one of the best communities on YouTube. Thank you all for being a part of this book club. Joanne, thanks so much. Uh, Gigi, say that again. You said, could you repeat the first phrase dropped tonight? What do you mean the first phrase? The quote at the beginning? Oh, the 2+2 quote. And it's actually in the chapter. We just didn't get to it yet. Freedom is the ability to say 2+2 = 4. Grant that, and all else follows. Freedom is the ability to say 2 plus 2 equals 4. Grant that, and all else follows. It's a really, really scary quote because we're, you know, it's just, we live in a day and age where it's scary to say things which seem obvious, right? You're just like, all right, what does it mean that we can't have certain conversations anymore? Jolie says, what do you sacrifice as a human when you live in a dictatorship? It kind of depends on the degree to which you're. It depends on what you're willing to sacrifice. I think certain fates are worse than death. You know, certain things under dictatorships, are worse than death. Um, and so, I mean, I think that uh, the scariest thing about George Orwell's work is that he gets into the psychology. It's not just slavery; it is psychological totalitarianism, where they don't just want the labor; they want your they want to turn you inside out. They want to see that inside they've got their claws as deep as they can get it, and you actually have given everything up for the sake of the party. But guys, we have gone well over the time. And I want people who watch this back to be able to have a really smooth, reading of it. I only kind of want to keep these to an hour and a half tops, and we're a little bit beyond that at this point. Uh, Thank you so much for deciding to be here. Be at the next one as well. We got to over 100. We're currently at 97, so it's like it's been stable, which is completely amazing. And I will see all of you tomorrow in Rin's chat. And today I'm going to be hanging out in the Discord for just a second as well. So thanks, everyone. Love you guys.